Hello, everyone, and today we're diving into internal boundaries. So, these are lines that are drawn inside of countries that affect everything from voting to representation to political power. So, think of it like school zones. Some students go to one high school while others go to another. So, even if they live just a few blocks apart, if you ever wonder why, this is why. So, we're going to go ahead and we're going to break that down today. All right, so by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the function of internal boundaries and how they influence elections, political representation, and power. So, ever heard of gerrymandering? If not, don't worry. We're going to go ahead and see how politicians literally draw lines to keep themselves in power. Spoiler alert, it's kind of shady. Okay, so to start off with the census. Every 10 years, the government counts everyone living in the US through a census. It's like attendance for the entire country. But instead of just seeing who's present, the census collects data on age, race, and income. Why does this matter? Well, the government uses this data to decide how much money different areas get for schools, roads, hospitals, and more. More people equals more money and more representation in Congress. Less people, well, your district might start losing funding and even seats in Congress. All right. So what happens after the census? Apportionment. Sorry. Then this is when seats of the House of Representatives are reallocated based on population changes. So if your state population increases, you can gain a seat. If it decreases, you might lose a seat. Okay, so there are 435 seats in the House of Representatives, and they have to be divided fairly among the states. Think of it like pizza. If Florida's population grows, then we get a bigger slice of the representation. But if another state shrinks, or if another state shrinks, they get a smaller slice. Okay, now let's talk about the U.S. elects, how the U.S. elects a president. And they don't directly elect them, the Electoral College does. And this is how it works. So each state gets electoral votes based on the number of House seats and senators. So the total will be 538 electoral votes. So 435 representatives plus 100 senators plus three for Washington, D.C. If a state loses a congressional seat, then it also loses an electoral vote. So winning or losing seats after the census can change the outcome of future elections. Okay, so every 10 years, the states redraw their internal political boundaries based on new census data. And this process is called redistricting. Voting districts, these are geographic areas that are used to organize elections and determine who represents you. So who draws the lines? State legislators do. I mean, meaning politicians decide how these maps are drawn. Sounds fair, right? Well, not always. That's where gerrymandering comes in. Okay, so in a perfect world, voting districts should be equal in population. No district should have more representation than another. It should be contiguous, and this means that the district must be done in one single shape. No weird gaps or islands or anything like that. And then compact. So boundaries should be smooth and centralized, not stretched into bizarre shapes. But when politicians gerrymander, sorry, and we end up with districts that look like squiggly puzzle pieces instead of smooth sections. So, gerrymandering is when politicians redraw districts to benefit their political party. It's like picking your own team for dodgeball and only choosing the best players. Completely unfair. So, here are two ways that politicians gerrymander. First is packing. So this is cramming similar voters into one district so that the other party wins more seats. Cracking is splitting up a similar voters across multiple districts to weaken their power. So an example of this would be, um, Ohio's districts are some of the most gerrymandered in the country. In some areas, one party controls 90% of the votes, and even in the state, everything is split evenly. Or even if in the state, everything is split evenly. Right. So, like I said, the ideal representative district would be when voting districts are equal in population, contiguous, and compact. So, they would be truly representative of the people living in that district. All right, so the impact of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering affects elections at every level. So, on the national level, it influences Congress and the Electoral College. In the state level, it determines who controls the state legislature. In local areas, even your school board and city council can be affected. The bottom line is that gerrymandering can make elections unfair by letting politicians choose their voters instead of the other way around. Okay, the United States Constitution establishes a system of territorial representation. So, in the House of Representatives, members are elected from territorially defined districts based on population. The Constitution requires a census every 10 years in order to enumerate the population and reapportion the representatives accordingly. So we're going to take a look at some real world examples of gerrymandering in action. First example would be in North Carolina's 12th district. This district was drawn in such an odd way that it looked like a winding river, and it's packed with African American voters in one district to weaken their influence elsewhere. The second one would be Texas redistricting battles. And in Texas, lawmakers have repeatedly redrawn districts to maintain party control, leading to multiple Supreme Court cases. And then third, Wisconsin's partisan gerrymandering. In 2018, despite one party getting fewer overall votes statewide, they won almost two-thirds of the legislative seats because of district maps. All right, so some consequences of gerrymandering. There's less competition in elected elections, and some districts become safe for one party, and it becomes an unfair advantage. Voter frustration, people feel like their vote doesn't actually matter, and when things like this happen, that's kind of how it plays off. And then political polarization, extremes in politics instead of compromise. So gerrymandering doesn't just affect maps, it affects who represents you and what policies get passed. All right, so we're going to go ahead and recap. The census determines representation and funding. Reapportionment shifts congressional seats based on population. Redistricting redraws voting district boundaries. Gerrymandering manipulates districts to favor one party. Now, think of it like this: if you had to draw voting districts in your state, how would you do it fairly? All right, so that's a wrap for today. Internal boundaries shape politics, elections, and daily life. And next time you hear about voting rights or redistricting, you know exactly why it matters and what they're talking about. See you next class.